Now let's look at the work of Gan Siong King, in particular one of his videos, which is the fourth video in a series. The video that I will be analyzing today is Koon Talk, Words and Works, which is the last video, video number 4 in this series here. Now it is important to remember, before we can actually look or think critically of this last video, it is important that we also look at all other videos before. Because this particular work was conceived as a series of videos, in fact, a series of videos featuring one person, which is Koon, the calligrapher. Therefore, if we want to know the meaning or understand deeper of the video number 4, we actually need to connect it to all videos that came before, which is video number 1, 2, and 3. Now, I will not be analyzing videos 1, 2, and 3 in detail. However, it is important for me to compare and contrast a little bit. Therefore, you'll be able to understand how video number 4 is different from the previous videos. Now, for video art analysis, which is a bit different from art analysis, which I've done earlier, art analysis, you are looking generally at a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional object. When I say object, I mean it is not something that is revealed over time. It is not a time-based object. So if you see a painting, or you see a sculpture, or you see a 3-dimensional artwork of piggies, they do not slowly reveal themselves over time like a video. Because video is a time-based artwork, therefore, when you think about video and video analysis, you have to actually slightly shift your thinking or mindset on how to approach a video art analysis. So these are my 3 questions that I will use as a guide. So you start off very basic. You will still ask question number 1, which is a description-based question. What can you see? But here you also introduce another extra element, which is what can you hear, since videos will always have some kind of audio track or sound track. So that's the description level. Then when you think about analysis, you are really breaking down some of these video elements, such as visual and audio. You're breaking it down and looking at why these particular effects were used. Why did the filmmaker or the video artist choose to have this composition for this particular scene? Why did the video artist choose to have a lot of close-ups? Why did he choose to have a lot of low-angle shots or very dark shots with very poor lighting, for example? So these are all questions that link to a formal analysis. Formal analysis meaning you're breaking down the video into the form or the parts of a video that we typically know are video art elements, such as visuals, such as sound, and also if there are people acting in it, then looking at things like actor, looking at things like production design. How is the scene set up? How's the location created or set up or designed? And of course, lighting as well. So these are some of the formal elements. Of course, not all of them will be used in every piece of video art. Now, the last one, number 3, is when we are actually going to do the interpretation, meaning we are finding meaning in the work and finding meaning in the formal elements. So what meaning is being conveyed in this scene or this particular part of the video? What meaning is being conveyed with this particular sound effect? These are all questions related to number 3. Okay, so let's look at this video work, Koon Talk, number 4. But as I promised, let's look back a little bit at some of the earlier works in this series by Gan Siong King. So let's start with the first. And having looked at all 4 videos, I can now be able to give you an overview of the series. Now, I'm not going to show you clips from the first 3 videos. Later, however, I will show you some clips and talk about video number 4. So for the first one, Chia Koon Talk Seal, the first video, actually, if you compare, let's compare all of them in relation, first of all, to the audio or to the music. Now, video number 1, the music is generally a little bit faster in tempo compared to video number 4, which is much slower. But video number 1 has quite a fast tempo in music. Then in video number 2, you have some music that is quite light-hearted in its cadence. And you also have the voice of Chia Koon singing. So you bring in a human element to the music. Because video number 1 is more instrumental music. Video number 2, you have Chia Koon singing. Of course, his singing is not the best, but he's not a singer. So you have his voice without music, and then you also have some instrumental background. And then when we talk about number 3, video number 3 about Brush, you also have instrumental music. Chia Koon does not sing anymore, but the instrumental music in video number 3 has a steadier beat or rhythm. It's also quite light-hearted compared to video number 4. Now, video number 4 by far has the lowest pitch of all other sounds in the previous video. And the tone and maybe the feeling you get when you listen, it doesn't give you a very light-hearted feeling. Now, part of the reason is because the type of music used is quite different. Right? So if you look at video number 1, the music is purely instrumental. Video number 2 and 3 is using music that comes from waltz. Waltz is a particular type of dance music that is light-hearted, like ballroom dancing a little bit. And video number 4 is the most different because it's using jazz music. Now, jazz music is the least danceable in the sense that it's more focused on experimentation with actual music itself. So that's the difference in terms of the audio part of it. And if you look at all 4, actually, even though some of you might think that video number 4 is dark in the lighting and in the mood, but if you were to go back and look at video number 1, 2, and 3, video number 1, 2, and 3 are way darker than video number 4. Actually, in comparison, video number 4 is the least dark of them all. Okay, so that's just a very brief overview of the music and also of the lighting of all these 4 videos. Now let's go in for a deeper dive. Let's talk about the first video before we talk about the 4th video. Now, I would like to compare the opening few seconds of each video so that you are able to sort of see how video 4 is quite different from the previous videos. Now, this is the first video of the series. As you can see from this first few seconds, the focus is very much on a close-up shot of Chia Koon's face. So we know this is going to be a video of a man, this particular man, calligrapher artist Chia Koon. And you also see him holding a seal. And the seal is actually his tool. In order to do some of his calligraphy, he needs this particular tool. So already from the very first video, it's quite clear we're talking about a man, an artist, and his tool. Now, if you look at video number 2,
if we are going to San Francisco.
Again, you see the artist, but this time it's not a close-up shot. In fact, you have a medium shot of the artist, and you also see him in his environment, in his studio, in his workplace. And you see him do this action where he's actually putting water and diluting his ink, because the second video is about ink and paper. So if you compare first and second, the first one, introduction to the artist, introduction to the tools of his particular art form. And then a second video, you see him in action in the process of beginning his work within his environment of his studio. And let's look at the third one.
The basic of the brush is divide.
Here you actually don't see the artist's face anymore, but you hear his voice, and he's showing you through very elaborate movements of his actual playing around with the brush, which is also another important tool of his trade. So immediately, things that are foregrounded in the opening: the artist, his tools, his environment. Three important elements when thinking about any creative person. Then let's look at the last one, which is number 4. And you can see how number 4 is quite different from the others. Okay, let's try to break down video number 4. You can see in the first few minutes, we don't see Chia Koon at all. But more importantly, we don't see anything that clues us in about the fact that this is a video about calligrapher artists. You don't see the brush, you don't see the ink, you don't see the paper, and definitely you don't see the artist's face. Instead, what you see looks like machines, gears, looks like some kind of scanner. And what you immediately might be inclined to think is that, oh, this is a video about some kind of photocopy machine or some kind of scanning machine, which is seemingly antithetical or contradictory to the idea of a calligrapher artist, which we typically think doesn't use machines. But here's when I want to break down the opening scene for video number 4. Now, in comparison to video 1, 2, and 3, which is more of the expectation we have of an artist, using materials, using tools, and showing his face, video number 4, you're looking at something that I would say is more metaphorical in nature. What do I mean by this? What I mean is the machine that we see in this opening shot of video number 4, and I'll show this to you as I'm talking, the machine that we see at the beginning is not human. It's not human in nature. It has gears, it moves, but it's a machine that does the same thing in and out day after day. It's a machine that's reliable, a machine that produces, that copies, that recreates, a machine that essentially runs and works in a rather sort of organized manner, and is a dependable machine. And this is when I'm going to say, using this particular machine, not just any machine, is a photocopying and also scanning machine. This is a metaphor for the calligraphy artist. Chia Koon is a calligraphy artist, but what does a calligraphy artist do? Basically, copies words, rewrites words, scans meaning looks and reads things, absorbs it and reproduces it. So even though some people might think the machine and the artist are very opposite kinds of beings or entities, I would like to make an argument here that actually the opening seems to suggest in this video that the artist and the machine are actually not very different at all. The artist does his work repetitively, every day, without fail, in a very organized rhythm. An artist is dependable in their ability to constantly do the same thing to perfect their skill. A machine, of course, is seen as unthinking, But in some ways, when an artist does his craft, he can also be rather unthinking. He's going through the motions of doing something that he has been doing for a very long time. And in the case of Chia Koon, he has been doing it for 21 years. So there's some similarity here. But where does the similarity end? Of course, the end of the similarity occurs when we see Chia Koon himself, when we bring him into the equation, into the video. And this is when he's sharing with us knowledge. As you can see, he's sharing with us knowledge of the 8 strokes in Chinese calligraphy. And this is how he's different from a machine. Because unlike a machine that is just reproducing, he has knowledge as well. And he's sharing that knowledge. And he's telling us something quite interesting, which is a knowledge of balance. So when the machine moves from left to right and right to left, the artist also moves from left to right and right to left when he's doing his calligraphy. But he's not entirely like a machine because he knows why he's doing it. He's doing it as part of the rules of Chinese calligraphy. And you can see this here in this particular scene where you see some of the visual effects created by Gan Siong King to direct our eyes to where the artist is actually drawing. Now, I would like you to look at the artist's eyes here. Every time there's a very extreme close-up shot of the artist's eyes, look at what Chia Koon is doing with his eyes. You can see it again in a short while. Look at his eyes. He is basically looking left, right, left, right. Just like the photocopy machine, moving left, right, scanning, taking in info, reproducing, balance, not very different from the artist, right? Again, when you look at the artist's eyes, and here I'm going to rewind slightly, look at the artist's eyes and his head. Look at the movement. The artist's eyes and head is moving just like a photocopy machine would. Left, right, left, right. And his hands also do the same thing. So in a very strange way, there you have it. Look at his eyes, left, right, left, right. So here I'm trying to make the argument, if I'm trying to do a interpretation, it's an interesting interpretation where you're associating an artist, a creative human, with essentially a reproduction machine. Are they very different? Maybe the film is suggesting they are not that different. There could be actually more similarities than we would think. So the concept of balance, maybe how humans understand balance in our history, in our ancient art forms, is the same kind of balance that is then used in the machines that we create. After all, aren't machines created by humans? So isn't it possible that a human's artistic logic would also then be used in the creation of machine logic? Probably not that different. Now, if you remember, Gan, when he came to visit our class, he did mention that he was very interested in science. And if he wasn't an artist, he would be a scientist. So isn't that interesting to connect these two things? Okay, here's when I'm going to move on. So we are moving away from discussing the metaphor or the discussion about balance, machine, and humans. And let's look at other parts of this video. Now, if you look at this video, it's always helpful, I think, when analyzing, to watch a video multiple times. A good strategy that I always use is I watch the video first as it's meant to be watched, with the sound and with as big a screen as I can. And then I will always spend time watching the video without sound, or just listening to sound without watching the video, so that I can take apart some of these elements in any kind of video. So here we are watching the video without sound. And when you take away the sound, you pay more attention to actually what's on screen, what's in the image. The sound sometimes can be a bit distracting. So here, let's look at what is in this image. You will notice Gan is always shooting Chia Koon in a very extreme close-up like now, or sometimes close up or extreme close up. Very rarely does he have a wide angle shot or extreme wide or even a wide or long shot, right? So there is this idea of zooming into an artist's work, his practice. This is a very detailed, micro look at what an artist does. It's not a macro, far perspective. And here, let's look a little bit at what's going on here. Here is an important part of the video where we go into Google, right? If you can see, when we went into Google, what is the logic behind moving into the Google Wikipedia universe? It's basically not so much Chia Koon, but it's also a reflection of Gan, the artist. This is what Gan does when he's doing research. So this is when you begin to see this is the hand, or rather the vision of the filmmaker, not of Chia Koon, the calligrapher. And look at this particular very interesting image where you have this word shy that you can see here. Now this shy does not occur in Wikipedia. In fact, it's Gan's insertion to kind of give a little bit of a sense of humor, a little bit of a kind of inside joke of why Wang Wei's face is turned away from us. So that's when these are moments when the filmmaker's personality or the filmmaker's hand, as we say, is visible. Now let's move on. Now let's think about how this particular poem is constructed. So this is a poem. Now I do not speak Mandarin, so I cannot analyze it from a poetic standpoint. But because I don't speak Mandarin, I can analyze it from a visual standpoint. Right? So look at this image here. This is of a mountain. And this is, of course, of the actual Mandarin characters that is written by Chia Koon. And when you break it down, you can see how beautifully Gan constructs this poetry about a mountain, a poem about a mountain visually by overlapping the mountain in the background and the Mandarin characters in the foreground. So you can see these are individual lines of characters standing tall, standing vertical, looking rather majestic, just as a mountain would. And that's how they appear on the screen in a movement kind of form. But then observe how they look like in a kind of united poetic structure shown visibly here. They are all put together closely, and before they might look rather lonely by themselves, but here they become a huge block of characters, looking not lonely anymore, but looking rather strong, stable, just like a mountain. So no longer do we see the mountain in the background, we see them looking like trees. Look at the transition here, right? You can see the transition. This is a perfectly executed transition where you have a dissolve, where you see these Mandarin characters, supposedly about a poem regarding the mountain, but here they look like rather tall trunks of the trees. And what's in the background? The trees. And as we proceed, we can actually see all trees in this image superimposition against the Mandarin characters, and then we see the sunshine. And back to the mountain again. So these three elements, mountain, trees, Chinese characters, they all fuse together in a rather visually coherent manner. What do I mean by visually coherent? As I can tell you what I mentioned here. Look at these. They are tall, vertical, straight, like trees. And then as they come together, slowly, more and more of them, they populate our screen. No more mountain, but instead rows and rows of characters, looking a lot like a forest of trees. And in the background, shining on them is the sun. So they are no longer alone. As the poem says, they are no longer alone, even though they might seem to be such. So the mountain, the trees, nature, sun, they all come together in this particular scene quite beautifully. And I would argue they are not dark at all. Notice how bright and nicely lit they are. You can see the sun. You don't feel the darkness that is prevalent in other parts of this video. Now let me continue. And here, if you remember, we are moving to a second poem where Chia Koon talks about some of his influences, in particular this particular Chinese poet. And he is going to share with us, after this stamp scene, Chia Koon is going to share with us a poem that Chia Koon himself wrote, partly inspired by Musin. And in this particular poem that Chia Koon wrote, look at some of the visuals. Remember earlier was the mountain, but here we have Chia Koon. And look at all the images of Chia Koon that we see here. They are of him when he's young, contrasting with his poem. Look at his poem here. Look at the background. Remember the mountain? It was also a blue sky behind the mountain. It was a bright blue. It wasn't a dark blue. But here, when we have Chia Koon's poems in his own words, he's not copying another poem by another poet. He's writing his own poetry. But look at how Gan decides to depict this poetry. He's putting it against a very dark backdrop. It's a blue that is deeper, darker, more like a turbulent ocean, not so calm and peaceful and stable and serene like the mountain and the trees. Look at Chia Koon's characters that he has written here. They are also less graceful, less thin in the line. They are a little bit darker, fatter, a little bit more chaotic looking. And as they move, you also see behind the little boat that we see moving there. And then finally, we see all the words again in white, probably in white as a contrast to the dark background. But what is funny is this is not a completely dark poem, because there's also some humor in it. If you still remember, he's talking about a particular line which says blow on you, and again we have the trees, but the trees seen in different light. And that's Chia Koon there laughing. And we can see this happens a lot when Gan is creating his film. He makes Chia Koon show and talk about certain things, and then he also gives us another image that is associated with what is being said at that time by the artist. So artist is making a joke, and we see an image or a picture of the artist laughing, but not the artist as a man, but artist as a very young child. So we always see this juxtaposition between artist, his work, artist, his words, and artist, his past. Because after all, what are the words and works of an artist if not something that comes from his past, from his history as a person? Now here is when we get to see some other older photographs of Chia Koon, and we can see him in various forms, in various age. And here I thought it's an interesting image where we're actually seeing him in his photo. So we have multiple levels of visuals in this one shot here. As you can see, you have the old photographs of Chia Koon, and they are composited, meaning they are brought together into this format. And what we can see is they are actually on Gan's computer screen. And Gan is using, I think, what looks like Photoshop to actually manipulate the images. So we can see many layers of photography and image making right here. You have a photograph, which is a two-dimensional image put on a computer to recreate this two-dimensional image for a two-dimensional screen, the computer, and later to be reproduced, to be recreated into a video work, which is a moving time-based image form. or medium. So what we can see here is all these different layers. Remember, cultural sedimentation. Similarly, here we have an artistic sedimentation. An artist's life, his memories, his old photos, his history, his archive, his current work, his previous work, all joining together and coming together in this final scene. And we have this artist here, he's singing just like he did in previous videos. And we also, of course, have the reproductive symbol that we see through the photocopy machine. The artist reproduces just like a machine reproduces. And a machine has a certain kind of rhythm and a balance, just like the artist does as well. And the artist here, I mean Chia, the calligraphy artist. So as we come to close to the end of this video, notice we are having a slightly bigger or a zoomed out view of the location, the artist studio. So we are no more at the machine, but we are at the location, the context. How or where does the artist create? This is his home, which we already saw it in earlier videos. And you can see this home of his is a dark space, is a rather closed and claustrophobic space, perhaps, but it's also a creative space. And this is when I'm going to say is the most interesting part of this video is the artist leaves his private creative space. He is no more in his own home or own studio. So if you compare with the other previous videos, the previous videos is always shot inside Chia Koon's studio. This is the only video where Chia Koon is brought outside. So we see him leaving the safety or the creative space that he knows very well into a kind of unknown. And we don't really know where this space is that he is, because all we know is he's in his car driving and there's some music. And that's all we know. But what we do know for sure is that he's no longer in a safe space. His life may feel dark in his studio. It may not feel very light outside because it's nighttime, but he has still left the safety for the possibility of something unknown, which fits very well with Chia Koon's own philosophy about his art and also with Gan's philosophy about his filmmaking. Now, if you look at this last scene, there's a song there.
Calligraphy is quite hard, but I think it's fun. So,
And here the artist is talking about his life as a calligrapher. And he says, you know, it's not easy, but it's also fun. So there's always these two contradictions. And listen to this particular song. The tone, the tempo of this song is so upbeat, it's so cheerful, it feels so light-hearted, but the words are seemingly quite dark in nature, talking about being alone at night. So again, you have these two different contrasts. The contrast between a light, upbeat tempo to the music, contrast with the dark, seemingly more depressing words of the lyrics of the song. And then similarly, you have Chia Koon. His life is lived with a bit of suffering. You know, it's not easy, but at the same time, it's also fun. So there's always these two juxtapositions. The movement between something dark and something light, something that's tough, but also something fun, something upbeat, but also something lonely. But to me, this video ends on a bright note because he's not living and staying in his same usual, stable, creative studio. He's moving outside. There's possibilities outside. There's more opportunities. There are things he doesn't know, things he can try out, new things he can experiment with. So that's when you can see the meaning of the ending is not as dark as you might normally think. And this entire video is actually looking at different elements of his life, and not all of it is seen in a negative light. So you have to be very careful when you're analyzing a video to not be too overwhelmed by the lighting. If you're too overwhelmed by very basic things like it's dark or it's bright, it doesn't always mean bright means happy. It doesn't always mean dark means depressing, right? You got to look deeper. You got to look at the music. You got to listen to the music. You also got to look at what is being said by the subject, in this case, the artist, and also see if there are other visual elements involved. Okay, the last part I want to talk about briefly is actually the sound. So if you listen to this particular video, you will notice there's a very clear rhythm to it. So I'll just play a little part of it from the beginning. So if you listen to the beat, it has a very steady beat, a very low pitch beat, unlike other videos where it's a little bit high pitch. Of course, the important thing to focus on for me is if you listen, the beat has an 8-beat kind of pattern. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Why 8? Because in this video, Chia Koon talks about 8 strokes in Chinese calligraphy. So in my mind, the actual use of the tempo and also the beats in the audio or in the music track is designed to relate or to closely match the content of what is being conveyed. So that's very masterful use of sound and beat. And if you think about the sound as well, the beats give you a kind of very rhythmic, repetitive feeling. Like this is something we hear every day, the same kind of beat all the time. We hear it, it gives us a sense of continuity. Just like the artist, the calligraphy artist, Chia Koon, he's been doing the same thing, different ways for 21 years, doing the same thing over and over, just like that beat that is there in the background, guiding and giving structure, audio structure to this video. So this is no ordinary beat. It is music that gives us a certain rhythm, a pattern, a repetition, but also relates perfectly well with the content, with calligraphy and its reproducibility, and also the rhythm of Chia Koon's life and work and practice as an artist. So this is when I would say the sound is critical to how we understand and appreciate this video. And it also gives us, of course, a certain sense of stability and calmness. Only when we reach the end, if you remember the end, just before we have the loud music at the end, that we can actually hear a break in that rhythm. Let me just play that.
Just like Musing, and he said, 艺术是光明磊落的适应.
Notice
Art
the music still
is an
playing.
open secret. I more prefer to
The music
convey my
only
emotion.
stops when the machine is turned off. And to me, that is no small matter. The machine that is the photocopying machine, just like the artist is a reproducing Chinese character machine, they both take a break as well. So that rhythm, that clear 8-beat tempo, it stops when we're at the end. When the artist is moving to something else, maybe taking a break, maybe doing something different, and suddenly there's no more musical sound. We just hear the diegetic sound of the fan, and we are brought back into this space. We hear the yawn of the artist.
I've been writing for 21 years. But I found that a lot of possibility, I think, is not yet explored.
Notice what he has just said. He said a lot of possibilities not yet explored. And what is going to happen after this? He's going to leave the safety of his artistic studio for that world of possibilities out there. The world that does not have the steady 8-beat tempo.
So I like to continue to do it.
So now when we are at the last part, that's when we start to hear a different soundscape altogether. Very different, not so repetitive and patterned in the beats, and also a completely different kind of visual feel because there's more red in this. There's a little bit more of a fuzzy or blurry kind of visuals. Nothing is very clear anymore. Why? Because the fact it's blurry and fuzzy is a good reflection of what the possibilities are out there for Koon. He doesn't know. They're still blurred. They're still unclear to him. But he's okay with that.
Life as a calligrapher is quite hard, but I think it's fun. So how
Again, the music, very upbeat. We end with the artist's face, just like we started video 1 of the series with the artist's face. But here the artist's face is not so clear. Here the artist is not in his safe zone. Here the artist is outside. He doesn't know what the future will bring. He's alone, but he's not lonely. And so that is a very simple, or maybe not so simple, way to break down a video and to look at different elements of it. And just remember, the most important thing to keep in mind is in order to understand a work of art, especially a piece of video art, it's important to look at the many elements, try and separate them, try and bring them together, try and think of the meaning of the visuals and the sound in conjunction with also the content or what is actually being said in the actual video. Any good visual artist who makes videos like Gan Siong King would care a lot about the separate elements because they are not just interested to tell a story in the voice of the artist, they are also interested to tell a story with image and with sound.